I just wanted to take a moment to say hello. My name is Michael Schutzler. It is my privilege to serve as the CEO of the WTIA. I am a Caucasian male with graying hair, and due to the rapidly shifting weather that we're experiencing here in the Pacific Northwest, I am wearing both a sweater and socks, both of which I rarely do. I want to take a moment to thank all of you for attending, and I want to thank the remarkably talented experts who've been giving us so much valuable information today. It's really been a joy to listen and learn and take a lot of notes. We have a lot of very practical and useful insights into how each of us can help our organizations make progress on our DEI journey. The WTIA has been actively committed to creating an inclusive workforce and an organization and a space for our employees and partners to work together, from the board through senior leadership down to the most recent interns who just joined our team. I'm extremely proud of the work that we do, but I'm especially proud that our work in this arena was interesting and inspiring enough to attract one of the country's foremost experts in DEI. Yolanda Chase has been a mentor in my own DEI journey and serves as the leader of all of our DEI efforts inside the WTIA and for all of our partner companies. Yolanda, I just want to say thank you for everything that you do for this organization. And I just want to say out loud in public, it is truly a joy to know you. I am very excited to turn all of your attention to my good friend and colleague, Yolanda, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Yolanda, it's all yours.
Thank you for your kind words. Michael, I want to say that it is absolutely a joy working with you as my partner, my confidant many times during the day, during the many long days that we're doing this very difficult work. So gratitude and thanks to you. We're thrilled to have an absolute icon in the negotiation world with us as our keynote speaker. Kwame Christian, JD, president and founder of the American Negotiation Institute. He is a best-selling author and business lawyer whose work has helped countless individuals overcome the fear, anxiety, and emotion often associated with the difficult conversations through a branded framework called compassionate curiosity. Kwame is regularly invited to give negotiation seminars and consult with individuals and companies to create and implement powerful negotiation strategies. He also hosts a podcast called Negotiation for Entrepreneurs, where he interviews successful entrepreneurs and shares powerful persuasion techniques. Kwame received his Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master of Public Policy from The Ohio State University, and his Juris Doctorate from The Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. He also serves as an adjunct professor for Otterbein University's MBA program and The Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law Dispute Resolution program. That's a mouthful. He's very talented. This year, he published his second book, How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race: Practical Tools for Necessary Change in the Workplace and Beyond, which offers tactical recommendations for using persuasive communications and conflict resolution techniques to advance DE&I conversations in the workplace. Many people, as you know, avoid conversations about race because of fear, discomfort, damaging important relationships, being misunderstood or ostracized. The list goes on. How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race offers a practical guide for making these crucial conversations easier and more productive. We invited Kwame to share his expertise in managing difficult conversations about race because his approach complements the Diversity Waymaker framework, particularly the emphasis on self-awareness and understanding one's own emotions when engaging in difficult conversations about race and dealing with resistance and polarization. When I built Diversity Waymaker framework, I wanted to ensure that leaders have the tools and the resources to advance identity reconciliation, understanding of self and lineage to be able to take action on DE&I issues in the workplace, to effectively convey one's message and viewpoints about race equity. It's really important to have solid grounding in one's own identity and lived values around these issues. Well, without further delay, let us welcome with warm hearts and open minds, Kwame Christian.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Yolanda. I appreciate it. It's good to see everybody. I'm not sure if you all are aware of what happened for the last 30 seconds, but my webinar froze and then it logged me out of Zoom. And so I just want to apologize in advance if that caused any little interruption there. But if you don't know what I'm talking about at all, just ignore this and just let's pretend everything's going well. But if something happens in the future, just know we'll get back to it. But I appreciate being here. It's good to be here. And this is a really important topic, and I'm excited to jump into it. And then in a little bit, Yolanda and I are going to have a quick chat. So I want to do a little a test here. Okay, so can you all just put in the chat, hey, how's it going? Hi. Let's just see, let's see what's happening in the chat. I just want to see to make sure it works. Good, good, good. Now let me tell you all, this is an old school professor technique just to make sure that you all know how to use the chat. Now there's no excuse for not participating, peeps. All right, so I know that. Okay, so as you're here, when you think about the topic of how to have difficult conversations about race, what would you say is your goal? Just put it in the chat. I want to hear from you all. What do you hope to get out of this presentation? And I'll read off a few of them as they come through. And as people are going through this, I'm going to go through our agenda too. So first, we're going to talk about the purpose, why we still have these conversations, and then the framework. And then we are going to, oh man, we got some good action here. I like that. I like that. Cool. And then we're going to talk about how we apply it. Great. So insights and experience from coaching people on the topic, greater understanding of passive bias, good, expanded learning, frameworks, overcoming anxiety, that's big, practical tools for application, more capability to move the cause and because the conversation is tougher, how to let other people know that we love and see them, tangible tactics to have better conversations with family, coworkers, and peers about race and reconciliation. This is great. How do we have conversations about race without offending others? Yolanda, no promises there. We can't always guarantee that. Remember this thing, we can only control what is within our control. Our responsibility is to do the best we can and speak respectfully to the other people in the conversation. But whether or not they feel offended isn't completely within our control. But you will have tools and tactics that you can use to minimize the likelihood of offense, but we cannot guarantee that outcome. I would be a lot more popular if we could. This is great. This is great. Hear insights about the framework and want to learn how to engage conversations with folks who aren't as far along in their openness to DEI and self-reflection. That is great, Christina, and I love the strategic use of euphemisms there. I see what you did. So this is good. This is good. This is what we're all here for the same reason. And so my thing is about practicality. Everything that you learn in this presentation, I want you to be able to practically implement it in your difficult conversations. And I also want you to think strategically about how you can use this for all of your difficult conversations in general too. So let's jump into this. One thing about me, I present better the more I'm interrupted. So I build in time for those interruptions, okay? So if you have questions, ask those questions because most likely somebody else has the same question. When I ask questions, my friends, these questions are not rhetorical. I want to hear from you, okay? We're going to chat, all right? So let's jump into it. All right, already handled that. We're going to move on. So understanding the purpose and the challenge of these conversations. Why should we have conversations about race? Because last time I checked, we lived in a post-racial society. We elected a Black president. I thought racism was solved. Oh, it's funny because it's not true. So why should we still have these conversations? What do you think? So much more work to do. Well said. Changes start with conversations. Exactly, right? We want to make all these changes. We want to make things better. How are you going to make things better without having conversations? One thing that we often overlook is the fact that some of these difficult conversations about race will happen with people who are like-minded. And I think that's kind of surprising because we assume, hey, we're on the same team, we're allies, we're moving in the same direction, right? But we still have to have conversations about how precisely to move in that direction. So we can't always think about this in terms of having conversations with people who don't see eye to eye with us. A lot of times we are surprised at how difficult the conversations are with the people who do see eye to eye with us. So that's important. You have to unlearn a lot of things. Racism is worse and more blatant. It's a journey. We have a lot more learning to do. Folks in power are lashing back against inclusion. They have to give up power so others can take and step into leadership. They are all the more important because people believe this. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Believe that we're in a post-racial society, right? It can help us to change and learn in our awareness, to break barriers and differences, cultural backlash against multiculturalism. Yeah, all of that, right? So fun fact, let me tell you something that I don't think I've said publicly, maybe once or twice, but with the book, How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race, when I submitted the manuscript, we'd already gone through several edits, and the publisher said, after going through the book a couple of times, I think we missed the starting point. We haven't really laid the foundation as to why we should have these conversations. And I didn't want to do that for a couple of reasons. First, I was tired of writing. So I'm like, I don't want to write another chapter. Second, it was a really hard question for me to answer because it seems so obvious. But then when you're asked to explain the obvious, it becomes really difficult, right? So chapter 1 of the book is actually the last chapter of the book that was written, which is interesting. And so I was racking my brain for weeks before I even started writing anything, trying to figure out what it is. And it came down to just one word. That word is care. We have these difficult conversations because we care. We talk about race, we talk about DEI issues, we talk about these sensitive cultural topics because we care. Think about it. There's nothing that we care so much about that we just don't talk about. What would that even be, right? So we need to prove that we care. We show that we care by leaning in and having these conversations. Okay, so when you think about the difficult conversations about race that you have as it pertains to your role, what do those look like? Let's get some examples. Okay, and I want to talk about this because awareness is really important. So in my typical negotiation trainings, when I'm talking about how to negotiate more effectively, the first slide is always, what is negotiation? Because a lot of times people struggle in negotiations because they don't identify opportunities to negotiate. They don't identify these everyday conversations as negotiations. So this is a bit of an awareness test for all of you. When you think about the conversations about race that come up in your role, what do they look like? So let's put it in the chat so other people can see. Talk about the ones that pertain to your actual role in an official capacity, and then also talk about the ones that kind of come up organically in surprising ways, because we need to become aware of those as well, because those are opportunities to step up and have these conversations too. And everybody check out Olga's comment. That's a really good analysis there too. And Brooke says, making mistakes with microaggressions and needing to circle back to apologize. Yes, microaggressions are happening all the time, right? That's big. Why have, having the conversation about why BIPOC staff have leave your organization. So retention rate being low when it comes to people of color within your organization, right? This is big. Keep going, peeps. Listen, I'm not going to let you off the hook. I want you all, I want to get these out here so you can see when are these coming up. Good. Official, practicing inclusive hiring. Unofficial, confronting unconscious bias. Yes, that's a good one. That is a good one. And let's get at least one more. There we go. Anita says, people who dismiss microaggressions as harmless. Oh, yes. Intent versus impact. Yeah, that's big. That is big. Very good. Good. Now, this is our motto at the American Negotiation Institute. We believe the best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations. So when you look back over the course of your life and you look at the most impactful moments, most likely there was a difficult conversation somewhere in the vicinity of that moment. So to a large extent, your success and failure, happiness and sadness is going to be contingent upon how well or how poorly you have these difficult conversations. Now, the thing is, we have to start thinking about our role as allies, as advocates for positive change in the workplace. And so a lot of times we look at these difficult conversations and we see the risk, we see the frustration, we feel the emotions, and we can get tired, right? Advocacy fatigue is real. But when you start to change your mindset around this and you start to think of these conversations as opportunities, you change your mindset, it makes it a little bit easier to lean in and have those critical conversations when they come up. Okay, so I want you to start thinking about conflict as an opportunity. And so whenever you find yourself shying away from a difficult conversation that you believe needs to happen, you need to slow down and just try to finish this sentence. This conversation is an opportunity to what? Right? Just finish that sentence. It's an opportunity to what? So let's use some of these examples. For Meredith, it could be an opportunity to address the retention issues and create a more inclusive environment for your staff, right? For Cassie, it might be helping somebody to understand. It's an opportunity to help somebody understand that they have a bias and how they can address and adjust and those type of things. And talking about microaggressions, I think it was Brooke and Anita who talked about microaggressions, helping people to understand that microaggressions are not harmless, and then behavior change needs to happen. These are opportunities that we can take every day to make the world a better place. And we're just making the world a better place one conversation at a time. That's our goal. And Maylene says, an opportunity to avoid more people of color suffering traumatization in the workplace. Absolutely, right? Because if we think about it from our own perspective, we're going to make decisions that will lead to our own comfort, and avoidance is a legitimate strategy for leaving ourselves in a position where we feel more comfortable. But then when we start to consider others, then we start to realize, no, this is bigger than me. This is an opportunity for me to sacrifice my comfort in this moment in order to help other people down the road. So that's a great example, Maylene. All right, let's talk about how to have the conversations. Now, when I'm going to show you these negotiation and conflict resolution tools that we can use to make these conversations easier and to be more effective in these conversations. They're going to be very simple and they're going to be very easy to understand. And now, this is where it gets interesting, because understanding isn't going to be your biggest barrier to performance in these difficult conversations. This is what makes it really tough. What makes it tough is that you are not going to want to do the things that I'm going to tell you to do. You're not going to want to empathize with the person that you're talking to. You're not going to want to be patient. You're not going to want to work through their emotions, because you're going to feel a bit of righteous rage from time to time based on the injustices that you see. And so I want you to remember this point. You have the right to feel how you feel, no doubt. I want that to be very, very clear. When it comes to the outcomes that we're looking for, we have to recognize that sometimes our emotions, our legitimate emotions, will get in the way of us accomplishing our goals. So every time you hear something and you feel that little twinge, like, I don't like that, that's an opportunity for self-reflection. Where does that come from? Right? Because it happens with me too. And I realize that for me, I have a bit of a benefit here, because I'm able to swallow my pride and suck it up a lot, because as a lawyer, I have to do that all the time. I have to advocate for my client. And I think if you start to think of yourself as attorneys advocating for a better organization, a better culture, those type of things, it will help you to swallow your pride momentarily and use some of these more empathetic techniques. And I'll share a story. I was giving a presentation to a public school system, and we were walking through the strategies that we're going to use. And there was a woman who said, I don't like this at all. It feels like we're giving more empathy to the racists that are causing harm than to the victims of the racism. And I said, listen, I understand that. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't feel right, does it? But I have a question for you. When you think about the ability to get the people who are standing in the way of progress, when you think about that ability, do you have the ability to just unilaterally push somebody and make them make a decision? Can you just force them to do the right thing? Do you have that level of leverage and authority within your organization to just force change regardless? And she said, no, I can't do that. And I said, this is the challenge. We have influence without authority. And so we have to approach these conversations understanding that they have the autonomy to do whatever they want. And it's our responsibility to then use the tools that make it more likely for them to make the right decision. And so it's going to be tough emotionally to do these things because you emotionally might not feel as though they deserve the level of respect that would make the conversation effective. And so I just want to speak to that and empathize with you because there will be a little bit of resistance when it comes to doing the right thing in these conversations. I don't want to say the right thing in like an ethical or moral type of sense, but the correct strategic move in that situation. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there before we go into it. Okay, so this is one of those examples here. So calling out versus calling in. So let's use the microaggression as an example. All right, Olga just made a point about microaggression. This is great. So let's talk about microaggressions, right? So let's say we are in a conversation, we're in a meeting, and the meeting is flowing, somebody commits a microaggression and the meeting kind of flows on, right? And so we have a couple of options. We could either call out in front of everybody, hey, what you said was wrong for XYZ reason, or we can call in. Now, strategically, what are the risks of calling out versus calling in? So calling in, on the other hand, let me just to show you what the other side of the coin is. Calling in is when you have a conversation with the person in private, where you come to them after the meeting and you say, hey, I want to talk to you about what happened in the meeting, right? Strategically, what's the difference? And an important caveat too, in this situation, it's not an ongoing threat. It's not an ongoing, continuous conversation of offensiveness. It's a passing comment, and now we're back on track. Good. All right. Christina says, embarrassing the person, getting their defenses up so they don't hear what you're saying. Exactly. Exactly. And so here's what we're doing. When you call somebody out, it triggers shame. There you go. And you remember, if you think about the work from Brene Brown, when somebody feels shame, they recoil, they pull back. And in order for us to get real change, we need people to be able to lean in to the conversation. We need them to be able to feel comfortable being vulnerable enough to admit that they're wrong and change. If we are trying to call somebody out in front of everybody else, we're not having a conversation. We're having a performance. And they are put in a position where they're going to try to do whatever they can to save face in front of everybody else. So they're not going to allow themselves to be vulnerable, and they're going to put up their defenses too, right? Exactly, Olga. Low self-esteem, uncomfortable situation, right? So strategically, calling in is a more effective strategy. Now, if it's a situation where there is an ongoing threat, what we want to do is think about it like momentum in a basketball game or some sporting event. It's like, if sometimes momentum's going in the wrong direction, coach doesn't know what to do, we're just calling a timeout. We're stopping this. We're stopping this now. Timeout, right? So what you want to do is you want to say, hey, everybody, I just want to let you know I'm not comfortable with the way this conversation is going. We're here to discuss XYZ. And then you ask a specific person a specific question that's on topic. So let's say we're talking about finances in the company. So I might say, hey, listen, I'm not comfortable with the way that things are going right now. We're here to talk about finances in the company and what our forecast is going to be for 2023. I want to refocus and ask Brooke a question. What are the biggest concerns that we have going forward in 2023? So what we do is we let people know what's happening is not great. And so we're going to stop it and ask a person a question to redirect and control the conversation, put it in like back on the right track. And then we can use the calling in strategy when the person is in private after the meeting. Okay, so how to start a conversation. This is often the toughest part. Let's use the example of microaggressions. Sometimes somebody commits a microaggression and they genuinely don't know the damage that it caused, right? So it's up to you in a lot of these situations to start the conversation. So I like to use a simple formula. So it is situation, impact, plus invitation. Situation, impact, and invitation. And that leads to engaged communication. So this is what let's stick with the microaggressions. This is happening all the time, and I think it's pretty relatable. So let's say we found ourselves in that meeting. We decided to use the calling in strategy, and we're going to talk to the person about what they said. Now, when we're talking about the situation, what we're going to do is we're going to describe the situation using what I call naked facts. So these are facts that are stripped of all interpretation, stripped of all judgment. So to the point where everybody, no matter what side of the situation they're on, they can say that is in fact what occurred. Then we talk about the impact, and we want to personalize the impact as it relates to us, because again, they might disagree with some other conceptualization of the impact. But if you say, this made me feel uncomfortable, they can't say, no, you didn't feel uncomfortable. That's weird. That's not how brains work. You're not in my brain, right? So then we invite them. Now, with the invitation, we don't want it to feel like an ambush. We want them to feel like they have an element of choice, but we're not giving them the option to not have the conversation. So the invitation is either now or later. So let's give an example. I'll give an example of a good one versus a bad one. So microaggression example. Hey, in the meeting earlier today, you said XYZ, and we'll put it like as a direct quote as close as possible. In the meeting today, you said XYZ. And I want to be honest, that made me feel uncomfortable because that's a term that has been used in the past to cause harm. And so I wanted to have a conversation with you because we've been working together for the last 3 years. You're somebody that I respect, and we're going to continue to work together. So I wanted to see if we could just talk this out. Simple. What was that? Like 20 seconds? Really, really easy. Now, let me give an example of something that does not work. Hey, earlier in today's meeting, you made an offensive comment. Okay, time out. Offensive? That's an opinion. Now we're fighting about that. That wasn't offensive. Yes, it was. That's what you call, and this is like a technical negotiation term. That's a dumb conversation. Right? We haven't even gotten into the conversation itself, right? So what you want to do is you want to make this as smooth of an entry as possible. There will be resistance in these difficult conversations. You should anticipate that, but we want to make sure that the resistance comes at the right time. And if we start the conversation off with things that they disagree with, like in the first 20 seconds, now we're going to struggle. So our goal through all of this is to make difficult conversations easier. Make difficult conversations easier. And that a big part of that is removing unnecessary barriers to success. All right. And this is a really, really, really simple formula that you can use to enter these conversations. Cool. Cassie, I got you. There's more to come. There's more to come. Cool. Before we move on, any questions? I know I laid a lot on you, but I promised that I would respect the time and be done at 45. I would prefer to have 6 hours, but I will get it done in 45. So any questions before we move on? All right. Like I said, I like to be interrupted. Where do we sign up for 6 hours of this? Hey, Maylene, Yolanda, you see that? You see that? People want more. So we'll make that happen. We will make that happen. This is great. Cool. So let's talk about level 1 versus level 2 communication. So with level 1 communication, this is communication for the sake of understanding. Level 2 communication, this is communication for the sake of persuasion. Now, this is the thing. When we think about understanding, that we should be spending, let me come up with an absurd ratio to exemplify this point, like 95% of our time in level 1 communication, focusing almost exclusively on understanding. So when I talk about understanding, I'm going to use the fancy term that everybody says, empathy. Okay, what is empathy? What does that mean? Let's build a definition together. Seeing yourself in the other person's shoes. Good start. Good start. Good. Having compassion for the person, being a good listener and support, sitting with the person's feelings. Caring and having compassion. Good. Allowing yourself to feel what the other person may be feeling. Ooh, good. I'm glad somebody said that, Meredith. So let's dig into that one. So for this is the challenge. This is the challenge with empathy. So empathy and sympathy often get confused because typically in just common parlance, they are more or less the same thing. But I want to draw a distinction here. So when I'm talking about empathy, I'm talking about the ability to understand. But what are we understanding? It's our ability to understand how the person sees, thinks, and feels about the situation. How do they see, think, and feel about the situation? I'm not always talking about biological sight here. I'm talking about what is their perspective? What is their point of view, right? And then when we think about sympathy, on the other hand, sympathy is feeling what the other person feels, which I think in interpersonal relationships is really powerful, can be. But when we're talking about difficult conversations where something's on the line, when we're trying to get behavior change, sympathy can be dangerous if we're not careful. Because if we start to feel what the other person is feeling, then we might start to make emotional concessions where we adjust our position and our request and our approach inappropriately based on how the person's feeling. Because by alleviating their emotional distress, we're also alleviating our emotional distress. Let me give an example, right? So if we have a situation where somebody used a microaggression in a meeting, let's just keep on rolling with that. It's easy. Let's go with the microaggressions. So somebody made a microaggression in the meeting. Okay, now we're having the conversation and we're saying, hey, this essentially the point that we're trying to make is that, hey, this behavior needs to change. Don't do that again. We're not going to say it like that, but I'll show you how to say it in a little bit. But ultimately, that's the point we're trying to make, right? And then the person says, oh, well, I feel so bad. Is it really that big a deal? No, we can just let this go, can't we? And then we say, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it seems like you feel really upset about this. It's okay. We can just pass on it, right? So we need to make that distinction. We need to be able to understand, but still maintaining emotional stability on our own end too. And then going back to what was said, Christina, seeing yourself in the other person's shoes, we want to be able to do that, but we want to also do that with the humility to understand that we will never be able to fully empathize. And that's the key to true empathy. Empathy is, at its best, like I said, understanding how they see, think, and feel about the situation, while still having the humility to understand that I will never know what they really feel like. So I'm married, been married for 12 years. We have 2 kids. I've been in the room when the kids came into this world. Traumatizing experience. But anyways, so I've seen my wife be pregnant. I've seen her give birth. I can empathize, but there will be a very clear limit to my ability to empathize because I've never gone through anything like that. And I never will, right? So I think there's a really important element of humility to empathy, recognizing that we can only go so far with our empathy. Now, what's interesting though, is by empathizing and listening and hearing the other person, sometimes the persuasion that we're looking for happens organically just through conversation. But if we try to push and start with persuasion too soon, then we run into problems. So let's think about this differently. So essentially, keeping it simple, with level 1, we're trying to start off with empathy and learn and listen, and that's it. And then we transition to level 2 when appropriate, and that's when we're going to persuade. What happens if you start the conversation off with persuasion? What do you think happens? What's the risk? Bingo, defensiveness, right? Walls go up. And when we think about defensiveness, think about the root word, it's defense. They're trying to protect themselves because they feel attacked. But if you empathize with the person first, then what you're about to say is less threatening. Yep, the backfire effect, exactly. So sometimes it's worse than not even being effective. It's worse than you think, right? Because sometimes with the backfire effect, you start to persuade too soon, you're too aggressive, and then not only do they not go along with you, but they're further entrenched in their previous position. You've actually made it worse, right? So there has to be a sequence to this. There's psychology behind all of this. So we're going to talk about the compassionate curiosity framework. This was a framework that I created from my first book, Finding Confidence in Conflict, and I went a lot deeper in it with how to have difficult conversations about race. And I spent years trying to make this process as simple as possible because, again, it's easy for an academic like a professor, a lawyer, a podcaster who likes to talk to come up with something that sounds really, really good, but is difficult to apply. So I want this to be so simple that you can put it into action every time in all of your difficult conversations. And just, a little teaser, a little Easter egg for future presentations, fingers crossed, okay, for future presentations. With the framework, it is designed for the difficult conversations you have with others, but also the internal negotiations that need to happen. It's a tool of introspection as well. So it's the same process both ways. So step 1, acknowledge and validate the emotions. Step 2, get curious with compassion. And step 3, joint problem solving. Okay, so we're going to acknowledge the emotions that people are feeling. We're going to get curious with compassion, ask open-ended questions with a compassionate tone, and then we're going to work with the other person to solve the problem. Internally, what we're going to do is we're going to acknowledge our emotions, feelings, and beliefs, and biases too. And then we're going to get curious with self-directed compassion to figure out what led us to feel the way that we feel or believe what we believe. And then with joint problem solving internally, what we're doing is we're reconciling the differences between our hearts and minds. What would satisfy me emotionally in this situation? Then what should I actually do in the situation? Like, what behavior do I need to engage in, if any, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind. But we're going to focus on the external conversation. So first, step 1, acknowledge and validate emotions. Now, when you think about race and conversations about race in particular, they're very emotion-filled. I think that's one of the reasons why these are so tough. What leads to the emotion? Why are there so many strong emotions around conversations about race? What do you think? Shame, guilt, yes, that's big, right? Good. We're afraid of being seen as racist. Yes, you don't want to get canceled. You don't want to offend somebody, right? Those are big. Those are big. So let me tell you two other big reasons, right? Identity and morality. So identity, what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be a person like me? What does a person like me do under these circumstances? But also morality. What does it mean to be a good or bad person? So let's go back to defensiveness. So a lot of times, if you are saying, hey, what you said, even though you did not intend to cause harm, it did cause harm, they get defensive. And so because they're protecting their perception of themselves as a good person. No, I'm a good person. No, I didn't mean to. You see, that's a natural human response. We can anticipate that, right? And then self-belonging. Oh, that's good, right? So I want to feel comfortable with who I am, right? And so the fear of not being labeled as a racist, identity, I cannot accept that identity. Like, if I accept that I did something wrong, am I still a good person, right? All of these things. Yeah, think about how deep this is. So imagine a person comes from a place, they grow up in a place where there's not much diversity, and they grow up watching the news, going to places of worship where everybody thinks the same way. And now they're finally introduced to a society or a part of the world where there's more diversity. And then they say something offensive in passing. And then you say, hey, listen, that wasn't okay. Now, this is what happens. The person needs to reconcile their identity as a good person. But it's not just only about them. It's like, but all of my family, all of my friends, they think and say those type of things all the time. Are they good people? And so the defensiveness isn't even for you completely. It might be for you, but it's also for like a whole bunch of other people that they might care about. So when you realize the extent of the emotionality, you realize why it can be so difficult. All right. There's no point in sending a message if they're not psychologically ready to receive it. There's no point in sending a message if they're not psychologically ready to receive it, okay? So we have to time these messages appropriately. It's really important. You can say the right thing at the wrong time and it won't work. So timing is very important. So actually, before we go, little trivia. Who do you think made this quote? Any idea on where this quote came from? I need at least 3 guesses. I like to have fun. Any guesses on who made this quote? Gandhi. Oh, you're close, Christina. That's a good guess. Let's get 2 more. Let's get 2 more guesses. MLK Jr., Oprah. No, we're going further away now. That was me. Read my book. Okay. All right. So we have to remember, there is a difference between being right and being persuasive. There's a difference between being right and being persuasive. How many times have you been in a conversation where it seemed like facts don't work? Has that ever happened? It's like, oh, that's interesting. I just gave you some data. You pretended. I think I just triggered Christina a little bit, right? Yes, it's a persuasion issue. That's the thing. We're advocates, we're allies. We want to make the world a better place, but we need a path to turning our passion into persuasion, right? That's the key. It's not a data issue. It's not. It's a persuasive issue, right? When we think about awareness too, okay, raise awareness. Are we doing that persuasively? We were aware of a lot of like political ads in the last couple of weeks. Were all of them persuasive to you? No. So we can't just say it's like an awareness issue, right? I think living in the intellectual age where we have access to so much information, it's made us a little bit persuasively lazy. We need tools, we need strategies for persuasion in order to move the needle. So when you think about the emotions that you've seen in these difficult conversations, what comes to mind? I saw shame, I saw guilt come through the chat a little bit ago. Let's label some more. What do you see? Rage, yeah, that's different, right? That's not frustration. That's not anger. Rage is different. Rage comes from a deep place. Pity, that's big. Fear, yep. Sadness, grief, yeah. Indignation, unwelcome, yeah. All of this is great. Pain, hopelessness, yes. Now we have to remember this thing. Let me see, do I have some brain pictures here? No, I don't. Let me tell you a little bit of psychology here. So the emotions are going to come from the amygdala. The higher level thinking comes from the frontal lobe. That's where we have logical reasoning, emotion management, executive function. That's all in the frontal lobe. Emotions and biases come from the amygdala, automatic, quick, okay? Now we have to remember there's an antagonistic relationship between the frontal lobe and the amygdala. So the more emotional you are, the less clearly you're thinking. The more clearly you're thinking, the less emotional you are. It's an either or proposition. Now, here's something to realize that's going to be a barrier to you that is kind of like a hidden barrier. We always think about negative emotions getting in the way, but we don't think about positive emotions getting in the way, right? Because that has a similar effect on cognitive process. So we have to realize that sometimes our positive emotions will get in the way. Pride. I see myself as a good person. I'm not going to be able to, I'm not a bad person, so this doesn't apply to me. Or something like moral licensing. So this is like, hey, I did something good, so I don't need to continue to be good in the future, right? So, hey, listen, we have more diversity now than ever before. This is great. So yeah, we don't need to invest too much more in our DEI efforts. We had 0 people of color, and now we have 3 out of 10,000. So yeah, we did move forward, but let's settle down these positive emotions so we can get focused again, right? Really important to recognize that sometimes our positive emotions can get in the way. All right, so what we want to do to lower the emotional temperature in the room is say, to label the emotion. If I had more time, I'll go into the psychology of it. Just trust me, it works, okay? So you're going to say, it sounds like, it seems like, or I can tell that. Now, we have to recognize that sometimes people, even though one emotion is not better than another, we have to recognize that there are certain emotions that people are more willing to accept. So for example, if you're saying, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're getting a little defensive right now. Listen, don't do that unless you record it and send it to me, because I think that'd be hilarious. Okay, that's not going to work. Okay, that you have to find a synonym that works, right? So what would you say if somebody is getting defensive? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're not really comfortable with the direction this conversation is going. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Sometimes people don't want to admit when they're angry. That used to be me for a long time. Pre-therapy, Kwame was an interesting guy. So I use frustration a lot of times. They'll correct you if you're wrong. And I think that's a big fear that people have. Like, what if I label the wrong emotion? What if I'm wrong? And I'll give an example. One time I was doing a mediation, and the woman was stonewalling me, not giving me a lot of information. So I said, okay, it's probably an emotional barrier, maybe frustration. That's my go-to. I'm gonna go with that. So I said, hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're really frustrated with how this is going. And then she stopped. She glared at me And then she said, oh no, Kwame, I'm not frustrated. I'm angry. And I'm angry for this reason, that reason, and this reason. And I said, okay, I apologize. It makes sense that you're angry. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's making you so angry? Right? People will always correct you. There might be a spike in emotionality, but they will correct you. You need to stick with the process, trust the process, right? And remember, it's not just acknowledging the emotion, which is the labeling of the emotion. It's acknowledging and validating the emotion. This is where it gets tough. Because when somebody's emotional, they might spew out facts using heavy air quotes here, things that they consider to be facts. And what you will want to do is counter them at that point. And they're going to say, no, you're not listening to me, right? And now is not the point in the conversation when you're countering. This is not what we want to do. We're listening, we're absorbing, it's data. Whether or not they are correct in their assertions at this moment, it's data. And so if somebody says something emotionally, I'm going to address the emotion and I'm not going to address the substance. I'm going to let them know that I listened, but I'm not going to counter anything because they're not in an emotional state where they can receive that. It's a timing issue. So you'll get your chance to correct them, but now is not the time. It takes a lot of discipline. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is what makes it so hard. You're not going to want to do it because you're going to want to counter them and clap back. Restraint is important at this point, okay? So next, we're going to get curious with compassion. So we're asking open-ended questions with a compassionate tone, okay? And so have you ever had a conversation where somebody accused you of yelling and you didn't think you were yelling? Has this ever happened to you before? Or maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just you and me, Beth. Yes, absolutely. 17 years of marriage, right? Yes, this is good. This is good. Yes, we all have had this. Okay, I've got some news for you. You were yelling. You were yelling. Because yelling is not about decibel levels. Yelling just means you sound like a jerk, right? So think about this. We've been in rooms before where people have yawned and then what happens? Almost as if by magic. What happens? One person yawns and then everybody yawns. Weird, right? So the reason why this happens is because of mirror neurons. These are nerve receptors in your brain that reflect back the emotions that they see. And so this is why I didn't just say it's the curiosity framework, it's the compassionate curiosity framework, because you need to be mindful of your tone. You need to be mindful of your tone. So if you're asking a great question, but your tone is off, people will sense that, and then they will react emotionally to your emotional state or perceived emotional state. Disclosure, just like a little disclaimer here, I'm not talking about tone policing, where somebody brings a legitimate claim, a legitimate grievance, and we say we're not going to deal with the grievance because we don't like your tone. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is in the middle of these difficult conversations, being mindful of the psychology of mirror neurons and adjusting your tone to make sure that the other person doesn't get triggered, right? Yes, important clarification, not tone policing. This is just about making sure that you adopt the right strategy for the right situation. Cool. Last step, joint problem solving. So what we're doing here with joint problem solving is we're working with the other person to figure out where the relationship goes next and what the future looks like, okay? And as much as possible, I want you to remember the term future-focused problem solving, because emotions tend to live in the past. The more you can transition into the future and what people should and should not be doing, those type of things, the more effective you're going to be. So in the microaggression example, it's not just that I want to tell them and give them the information, hey, what you said was offensive. I actually want them to take that in and change their behavior. So it's not just about sending a message, it's about making sure it's effective. So let's use an example. Let me have a little conversation with myself here in the waning seconds of this presentation. So, hey, in today's meeting, you said XYZ. That made me feel uncomfortable because that's a word that's been a little bit sensitive for me in the past. Want to see if you'd be open in having this conversation. Sure, Kwame, I don't see what the point is of the conversation. It seemed like everybody was fine. Like, yeah, I appreciate that. But the challenge is that I felt this way. I talked to some other people, they felt that way too. And so I was wondering if you'd be open to not using that. this is quite shocking. I don't know why we should be doing this. I feel like I'm being attacked. Okay, emotions. I'm not going to counter this. I'm going to say, so correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like you're not really comfortable with the way the conversation is going. Yeah, I think I feel like we're getting too sensitive. I don't want to do this political correctness type of stuff. I said, okay. So again, just quick summary. Sounds like you want to avoid political correctness, and you think this might be a little bit too far. Yeah, okay. No, that makes sense. So what would you say your goal is for your relationships with your peers, shifting to getting curious with compassion? Well, I want to make sure that people think that I'm respectful and we can work well together. Potentially, what impact could it have on other people if you continue to use these words that they might find offensive, regardless of how you think about it? How might that affect them? Okay, yeah, I can see that might have a negative impact. So, okay, considering that going forward, what do you think we should do? How should we approach this? Okay, well, I should probably apologize and I probably won't use that term, right? That's a simple example because I know I'm at 4:46 and I promised I'd be done. But that's an example of how you could use the framework. And I'm sure Yolanda has great questions for us too. So yes, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. And I'm looking forward to chatting with Yolanda too.
Thanks so much. I mean, we're going to continue and kick open a bunch of different doors so that we can unpack some of this. Just very, very interesting, perspective and understanding. I think that you're providing for folks on, I think things that we never even think about, right? When we're getting into conversations that about race that really are polarizing, right? So before I start with my little inquiry and our chat, I want to read a passage from your book that caught my attention when I first opened the book, because I said, I think this is exactly like the question of the day. And it says here, people who aren't used to talking about race and don't feel comfortable doing so, but find themselves in a position where they must, can be particularly ill-equipped for these conversations. Even people used to talking about race often find these conversations challenging. I would be one of them, right? The potential for awkwardness and offense abounds, but so do the opportunities for creating connection and solving problems, right? So while we've made great progress, you say, in a society in terms of race, equity, and justice, we still have a long way to go. To solve our remaining problems, we need to be able to talk to one another about them. So that leads me to my first question around why is it important for everyone who wants to engage in advancing DEI and having these conversations and talking about it, start with understanding their own motivations, biases, and cultural influences. I mean, I think it's really important to start there first.
Absolutely. So think about this. Imagine driving. If you're driving your car, you don't drive the same way every single day. You have to be mindful of the conditions. If there's traffic, we're going to drive differently. If there are kids screaming in the back, we're driving differently, right? If it's raining and snowing, we drive differently, right? We have to be aware of the conditions because it will impact the driving. We also have to be aware of our emotional conditions as well. We have to be aware of what's happening beneath the surface. We have to be aware of our biases. We all have biases. It's not a question of whether or not we have biases. It's a question of how they are going to impact us. Are they serving us? Those type of things. And so if we don't do that analysis, we are going to respond not only to the stimulus in front of us and the situation in front of us, but we're also going to be responding to the shadows in the past that we have not addressed, right? And so we have to understand what's going on beneath the surface so we can be better advocates.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about emotion, can you share more about the importance of acknowledging one's emotions before diving into a difficult conversation? And I'm just going to add that for me, I've been doing this for 33 years and I still have a little trigger in my gut, right? That when someone says something that may be in conflict to my beliefs, my understanding, my training, my expertise in this area, there's a little thing in my gut that's just like, right? I want that emotion to come out. And I really have to focus very hard on not letting my emotions lead in the conversation. And I am a person with a multicultural background, multiracial background. I've got a lot of intensity and devotion and just when it comes to who I am. And that can often be, often translated into, oh, she's an angry Black woman or whatever, and she's letting her emotions guide. So I have to be very mindful. So share with us, emotions check. How do we do that? Right?
Yes. So this is great. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of times I think emotions are inappropriately vilified. Emotions are biological realities. That's it. And it's our responsibility to manage them. And we always think about managing other people's emotions, but we can't manage somebody else's emotions until we manage our own. That's really important. So I think it's important to honor our emotional states, but we have to make sure that we're putting it in the right way, in the right place, right? So let's go back to the car. So
Okay.
the emotions can be in the car, but they can never have their hands on the wheel. Imagine if Anchor has his hand on the wheels, like we're ramming that person, right?
Exactly.
They're not making good decisions, right? So this is an example of having that internal dialogue using compassionate curiosity, right? So let's say we're having the conversation and somebody says something in the conversation that kind of triggers you. You're like, I don't like the way that felt. Let's use that exact example, Yolanda. And so here's what I do. I go through compassionate curiosity in my mind, internally. So I said, okay, great. What am I feeling? I'm angry. Okay, good. Anger is a good place to start for the sake of this example, because anger is a secondary emotion, not a primary emotion. Typically, anger is triggered by another emotion. So what else am I feeling? I'm a little bit embarrassed because what they said was offensive and it doesn't seem like they even acknowledge that. So I'm feeling a bit embarrassed and disrespected that they think that what just happened is okay. I'm also annoyed that it doesn't seem like any other allies are stepping up to say anything. So that's frustrating me too. Okay, anything else? No. Okay, so what is causing you to feel this way? Well, from my past, I remember there was somebody who used that term. That doesn't make me feel good. Okay, what else? Well, I've been working at DEI in this company for a while, and I'm frustrated that we're still having to deal with these type of things at this point. Okay, what else? What else are you feeling, and why are you feeling it? I think those are the main things. Cool. Moving on to step number 3, which is joint problem solving, reconciling differences between our hearts and minds. There might be a part of you that I didn't address. It might be fear holding you back. So you might be feeling all those things and you don't want to have the conversation. So with the last one, when we're talking about joint problem solving, reconciling the differences between our hearts and mind, what would make me feel better emotionally, but then what should I actually do? So what would make me feel better? If I don't have this conversation, that'll make me feel good because I don't have to interact. Okay, that'll handle the fear, but what about the anger? What about the frustration? Okay, no, I wouldn't feel good. I might feel good in the moment by avoiding it, but I won't feel good long term because I passed up on an opportunity to have this conversation. And honestly, if I walk away from this and I don't address it right now, I'm not going to respect myself. I'm going to feel like I missed an opportunity. I'm going to regret that. So what should I do in the real world now? I should step in and have this conversation. Now, this seems kind of mentally cumbersome, but you can, as you start to practice, you can start to get that level of depth down in like 5 to 10 seconds. And so what I like to do is I always have a notebook around with me as I'm doing a difficult conversation. So what I would say is, hey, give me 1 second. You mind if I take a couple of notes here? And I turn that note taking into almost like a mini meditation, controlling my breathing. And I'm going through the process because people give you that time. And then I come back once I'm stabilized and then I go into the conversation.
Excellent, excellent. I'm definitely going to take that away. That's a major takeaway for me. I keep a notebook around, but I know I need to use it to meditate, obviously, before my responses. From the compassionate curiosity framework, why is it important to engage others in the joint decision-making process?
Yes, collaboration builds commitment.
Exactly.
That's it. And so you want them to be part of it. So think about, there's something called the IKEA effect, where they found that people who buy furniture from IKEA, they feel emotionally closer to it because they actually had to do the work of putting it together. And so when you get somebody to come to a conclusion and they can look at the agreement and say, hey, I played some kind of role in putting this together, I can see me in this deal, then it makes them more likely to commit for the long term.
So what happens if you're stalled in that process? If the decision-making is just stalled and you're running up against a brick wall, the negotiation aspect is just simply not working and not leading to, solid decision-making and, a unilateral kind of, outcome, positive outcome.
It depends. I'm a lawyer. How long did it take me to say it depends? And you knew it was coming at some point, right? So really what we need to do is we need to recognize that, again, your responsibility is to be effective. That's what you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have our goal. If the goal is still unresolved, then we still have other mechanisms to put into place. And so when I think about conflict as an opportunity, I think of it not just as an opportunity for me, but an opportunity for them. I'm giving you an opportunity to be part of my problem-solving process. If I have a problem, the problem will be solved, with or without you. Okay, so you can be part of this or not. And so I think persuasion takes time in a lot of situations. One person, you have one conversation with them, they're like, Yolanda, I got it, we're good. And then another person might take 3, 4, 5. And so persistence is part of the process. Again, political season, let's roll with it. There is no political candidate who in August said, you know what, we've been hitting them hard with those ads. They probably got it by now. We don't need to try to
That's
persuade.
one of the ads, right?
Exactly. We're done with
Exactly.
the ads.
Yeah.
No, we continue. But then also we have to recognize if we run into a wall where like, okay, I have been persistent. I've had multiple conversations. It's not working. Then we turn up the volume. Now, remember, negotiation is but one of many other problem-solving techniques. You might need to circumvent the person. You might need to have negotiations with other people to build up your coalition so you have more political capital. If it is significant enough, you might need to get media involved, lawsuits, those type of things. But again, you have to find leverage where you can. I think that's really what it comes down to.
And I think we also have to be fearless in that leverage, right? We often talk about with Diversity Waymaker how really using your idiosyncratic capabilities in a room of individuals where that credit is given to similar thinking, right? Where others are kind of, aligned with maybe the power dynamic in the room and won't deviate from that. And so it's how super important it is for individuals and proponents for equity and inclusive workplaces to really think about I have to be fearless in my approach to this, and convincing and compelling, often providing information and giving context where sometimes data isn't present. But I definitely need to be fearless in my pursuit to do it. I can't be so concerned about, negative outcomes, right? I have to be looking towards the positive outcome that this provides. So for CEOs and other C-suite leaders, what should they stop doing in order to authentically support equity initiatives? I just mentioned power dynamic, right? And how folks tend to lean into that dynamic for fear of whatever, right? Retribution, whatever it is. So what do they need to stop? What do CEOs and C-suite leaders basically need to stop doing to make sure that doesn't happen?
Stop making promises and not following through. Like that's the big one. Because when you think about trust is something that is earned. I've heard a great comment after one of my presentations last week. Trust is gained in drips, but lost in buckets. And so if you're trying to demonstrate your commitment to DEI, a lot of times people make these really grandiose statements and then they don't follow through. Or they say, I'm committed to DEI, and then they don't show up. Like you're not even showing up to the meetings.
Right.
You're not showing up. That's the bare minimum. So they need to stop not showing up and stop not following through. Because here's the thing, in negotiation, I like yeses, I like no's, I hate maybes. What am I doing with a maybe? So for me, I'm going to push the maybe one way or another, because at least with no, I get some clarity. So I would much rather have a CEO who says, I'm not interested in DEI. I would prefer that, because now I have a target. Now I can actually address something with specificity. It's really tough if you have somebody who says, I love DEI, but then their behaviors don't match their words. Then it's almost like racial gaslighting here. I don't like that. So I think just being consistent and showing up when you can. I think people don't really appreciate how much their presence matters.
100. And I think often what we're hearing from a lot of leaders who are trying to be, catalysts for DE&I within their organizations and who are responsible for actually programs and moving the dial. I've heard them say, well, my CEO or my board, my C-suite, which is comprised of predominantly white males, is saying, hey, I'm just a white privileged guy. I don't know anything about this stuff. So, let's toss it over to somebody else, and almost a way of kind of deflecting responsibility so that they don't have to dig deeper into their own identity and why they're doing that to begin with, right?
And quick point to that point, Yolanda, because that's an example of where internal compassionate curiosity could be used by them for some self-work, right? So I don't feel comfortable in this situation. Well, why is that? What is it? Well, I don't feel like I should be stepping up in this conversation. Isn't it more about people of color and women and minorities, right? Maybe it's not my place, okay? And so they need to go through that self-work, right? Because a lot of times we have to distinguish between thoughts and feelings. That's a feeling. It's not like a conclusion that came out of rational thought, right? But a lot of times people don't know the difference between thoughts and feelings, and then it leads you to act upon feelings that lead you in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. And some of that is kind of habit, right? And when we talk about self-reconciliation, identity reconciliation, we really are speaking in terms of that exactly, like what in your lineage is speaking to you at that time, that's saying, what's pulling up from your lineage, pulling up from your experience and your life that has you believing that you don't have a voice in this or shouldn't have a voice in this, right? I always use the example of Lyndon Baines Johnson's Johnson being someone that was viewed as a racist, but did non-racist things, right? So it's viewed by some as a racist. And so for me, when I think about being a practitioner, what advice do you have, as we're trying to influence and negotiate inside organizations? It gets weary. We get tired, we cry a lot, right? I don't get to take off the skin when I go home at night, right? I live this work. I literally live it. And so how can we make incremental change in an environment that is slow, right? This is a marathon. And still maintain, our strength and our ability to be able to really do that in a way that's compelling, because we get tired and we're weary.
Yes, no, this is and my smile is not at your weariness, Yolanda.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah,
it's understanding, right?
smile is at the consistency of this question. I was in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago for Feeding America, and they asked the exact same thing. And I'll give you the exact same response. You are not going to like my answer. You need to rest.
Rest.
That's it. You need to rest. So in sports, they have a concept called load management. And so over the course of a long season, what they do is they strategically bench some of their best players to make sure that they're managing their minutes so they can show up for the playoffs. Because what they're realizing is that with a long season, their players are showing up in the playoffs all broken up when it matters the most. Right. And so you have to start thinking about yourself as the DEI superstars you really are. And sometimes that requires benching the superstar so we can keep you for the long term. Like you said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We cannot help people if we are like completely burnt out. And so I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that we feel what I would consider a little bit similar to survivor's guilt. So imagine if you're in like an accident, your friend passes away, but you don't. I feel bad about that. I feel like I don't even have the right to complain, right? And I feel bad about doing things to make myself feel good, right? But the right answer is to listen to your body, compassionate curiosity again, and then bench yourself from time to time. It's not a selfish thing to do. Sometimes the best thing you can do for the communities you serve and the organizations you serve is to rest when you need to rest.
I'm going to take that to heart and actually insert a bye week, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
I need to take my bye week and replenish and rebuild. And I'm heavy in meditation, and my spirituality definitely takes me there. I'm also one who is a leader that believes that, the weariness leads to greater impact, right? and we're focused on the impact on a day-to-day basis. So I appreciate and honor the fact that you've told me to rest. Michael tells me to rest as well, and all of you other DEI catalysts out there need to rest. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we're really hearing some additional tips that you could provide us. And since we have 10 more minutes, and I know you were kind of had to rush through your presentation. So what can you provide us in the next 10 minutes that will help us kind of summarize and put this all together in one nice little box that we can refer to later?
I would say the biggest thing is making sure that we are goal oriented in everything that we do. Because when you stop and think about the actions that you take as it relates to the goals that we have, then it helps to make our decisions a little bit clearer. If you want to just take like every self-help book, everything that is about good decision making and put it into one sentence, it's prioritizing the long term over the short term. And so a lot of times we'll find ourselves using what I call cathartic communication. So this is communication that is meant to make us feel good in the short term. We might emote really fiercely, like we might lash out on somebody that we label as a racist, for example. That might feel good in the moment, but long term, what's the impact? So if we do that in front of other people and the other people say, ooh, I do not want to talk about a sensitive issue with that person, I'm going to get eviscerated. I didn't even think what they said was bad. That's terrifying.
Right, leaving dead bodies. Right, exactly. Yeah.
And remember, we cannot shame people into being allies.
Right.
We can't say, oh, no, who says that? It's like, you know what? If people beat me up and now I'm on their team. Like, that's just not how humans work.
Exactly.
So
that's exactly true.
So we have to remember, long-term strategy will require us to sacrifice our emotions in the moment, but we're sacrificing it for the greater good. And I want you to remember, like, this isn't easy. This is hard for everybody. It's hard for me. But when you start to recognize that every conversation is an opportunity for practice, then we start to develop these habits, right? That's really what it comes down to. Don't overthink it, because I think a lot of you might consider yourselves to be intellectuals. The brain has a way of masking its fear. Fear is a very crafty emotion. And a lot of times it hides itself into things that seem illegitimate. And so what we say is, oh, you know what? This is really good. That Kwame guy was good. You know, what I'll do is I'll read his book. Then they read the book. They're like, well, he has a podcast. How many episodes does he have? 680 episodes. Yeah, I got some work to do. And then like maybe in 15 years, then I feel ready enough to have a conversation. Nope. That's why I keep it simple. So you can practice and start doing this. That's really what it comes down to. So take every opportunity to practice the framework at home, at work, and then it becomes a habit.
I think that's great advice, and practicing the framework, practicing in anything is really going to make sure that you've kind of solidified it in not only your actions, but in your spirit, right? So that when you start to backslide a little bit, it's so ingrained in who you are that you quickly recognize that you're deviating from the goal that you originally set for yourself, right? I wanted to see if anyone has any questions in the chat for Kwame as we start to close out. If we have a few minutes, like 5 minutes, I want to see if anybody has any specific questions for Kwame besides wanting his autograph. I see somebody wants.
I saw that. I will find a way.
But they want your autograph as well.
Listen, get me to Washington. We'll make that happen. I see Brittany has an awesome question. Earlier, she said, if we wait to call in someone and don't do any calling out during the meeting, how do we avoid that sort of language being continuing to be used in others in the future? Is it ensuring leadership sets the tone from the start? I think leadership sets the tone. I think that's a big situation. I think that's important. But I also think it depends on the situation too, right? So if somebody with these situations, when I'm doing a normal negotiation training, then I come up with these hypotheticals, these things off the fly. It's really fun. But with this, I can't just like practice being racist. Like, let me take a racist trope and throw it here.
Right. Practice that.
And now I'm canceled. Okay, so
right.
if it's something that somebody says and it's not like indicative of other patterns of behavior that you've seen from other people, you can assume this might be a one-off, and then you address it with this one person. Right? Like a spot check. But then if you see like this might start a trend, other people start doing it. Now you might need to say something publicly, not like shaming the person publicly, but it's like, hey, everybody, like maybe we send out an email or maybe at the beginning of the next meeting. Want to let you know in a couple of the past meetings, some inappropriate things have been said. We've addressed that with the people who are involved. That's a private matter, but it's been addressed. Just want to make sure that we're treating each other respectfully and those type of things, right? And again, we have to be mindful about the words that we use and the way that we approach it as to not trigger shame. And we might say they don't deserve this level of compassion. Whether or not somebody deserves compassion is a little bit above my pay grade. I don't know who gets to determine who gets the compassion, but I can tell you what is effective and what is ineffective. And taking that as an opportunity to shame somebody inappropriately and unnecessarily is most likely not effective. And so if we go back to our goal and figuring out what our long-term goal is, and then just reverse engineering our strategies and tactics from the goals, I think that long-term type of mentality will help us to make better decisions under the circumstances.
I agree 100%. Christina wants to know, when do you know when to walk away, and how do you come to terms with it?
So I think, again, we have to think about our goal. We have to also think about our well-being too. If your well-being is jeopardized, then it's best to walk away. One of the people I quote, I love Rebecca Zung, negotiation expert. She specializes in negotiating with narcissists. Incredible work. And with her first book, she has her framework is called Negotiate Like You Matter. And with that, you can't allow anybody to abuse you verbally or racially, right? We can, there are a lot of things that are negotiable, but respect is not one of them.
It's not one of them.
Right? And so we have to think about that, and we have to recognize that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do in a conversation is walk away, but you have to like walk away in the right type of way. And so you might say something, listen, I appreciate you having this conversation. I want to be candid with you. I'm really not comfortable with the way that things are going right now. I'm going to need a little bit of time to process this. Let's revisit this at another time, right? One of the things about negotiation that people often forget is that the negotiation happens when you want it to, right? That's it. If I'm done negotiating, then you're done negotiating too. That's not a choice. You can't force me to, right? So I think you have to have the courage to walk away when it's time to walk away.
Beautiful sentiment. And Sean wants to know, how do you address, Sean, I think you rolled up for a minute. How do you address your own culture, your own people that are showing the same unfair practices? Heard a lot about proximity whiteness, proximity blackness, proximity racism. Heard a lot about.
Now when you want to get tired, like this really can wear on you, right? I think here's the thing with the framework that I propose, the beauty is in its simplicity, right? I like Da Vinci saying, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And so when we are having these conversations, if we have to think about like different situations and see which tactic to pull off the shelf, a lot of times the conversation expires, we miss our opportunity. And so it's the exact same thing, compassionate curiosity. That's it. You lead into the conversation using situation, impact, invitation, and then you flow through the conversation using compassionate curiosity. And the simplicity is what allows you to take action. If you're trying to find the right tactic, then you're going to kind of sit there and it's your fear masquerading as strategy. You know, that's big.
Exactly. Olga, she says, or they say, what's an appropriate way to bring attention to the organization that they need to work on DEI, especially if it's a health department and they're only one of 2 people of color working as an LTE, not considered an employee, but long-term employee contract. Is it appropriate in her position to have a positive conversation to bring cultural awareness, inclusivity, and diversity? She says they've been there for 2 years.
This is great. This is a great question. And the answer is yes. And Olga, you knew the answer was going to be yes. Okay. You knew it. So yeah, it is. We just have to, we have to find the way to do it though. That's the thing. And again, let curiosity lead the way. So, hey, I went to this great session, the DEI summit, and it went really well. And it made me want to just ask a couple questions. Is that okay? Yeah, so cool. What is our strategy for DEI coming up? Okay, we don't have a strategy. Interesting. Hypothetically, considering the fact that we're a health department, what impact could not having a DEI strategy have on our goals? Okay, then you just flow through the conversation, just get it started. And then you want to make sure that you're full ending, like joint problem solving, you're ending with a commitment. All right, considering the fact that we don't have any plan at all.
Zero.
What should we do about that? Who should I talk to? Great, let's make that happen. And you're holding people accountable, right? The negotiation never ends. I think about negotiation as a never-ending game of chess. The moment we meet, the negotiation begins, it never stops, right? So right now, what we're doing is every single conversation, our goal is to advance our position. And I use chess because I played over 20,000 games of chess online. It is an addiction at
You
this
and
point.
my son, you and my son.
We might have played each other. I hope I wasn't
Yes,
talking.
I'll tell him.
But yeah, so it's like when I'm playing chess, I don't always know precisely where the opportunity is going to come. Like in 10 moves, I don't always know what I'm going to do, but I do know what moves I can make now to put myself in a better position. And so when you start to think about every conversation as an opportunity to advance your position and an opportunity to advance equity, then we can realize that these are opportunities to just incrementally move things forward. So yes, you can have influence, even though you might not have official authority within the organization.
Right. And it does make you feel like you're taking a part of the, making yourself a part of the solution and not just sitting back and observing what is not happening. Kwame, thank you so much. This has been beyond a pleasure. We're really looking forward to having you back and continuing this conversation, figuring out ways we can create more synergy between the work that you do and the work of the COE and the Diversity Waymaker. We wish you all the best. We are grateful for you. And please keep everyone uplifted in your circle with your words of encouragement and this extraordinarily wonderful framework.
Thank
We
you.
thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Great being here. Y'all have a good one.